I'm an immigrant to Montreal, to Quebec, and I'd been here a couple of years, and I'd been doing some directing with other companies. And I got a call from the wonderful Akute Azu, who basically asked me if I'd be interested in becoming the artistic director of the Black Theatre Workshop. And I said, "Have you ever seen me?" And he said, "No." And I said, "You know, I'm white." And he said, "Oh yes, we know all about that." And I was like, "Well, isn't that a problem?" And he said, "No, we just want your expertise." So I thought about it, and I was at a loose end, and I thought, why not, I suppose. But that's why I was always the acting artistic director, because I felt very clearly that it was important that the company be directed by a black director as soon as was entirely possible. My early memories from this time, well, we were at the building on St. Catherine, which was kind of an old karate school. So it was kind of heading off into the seedy part of St. Catherine all the time to work very hard. I kind of walked in through the door, and Akute was like, "We've got to put together a whole season and all of the grant applications." And we had about 3 weeks to do it in, because the grant deadlines were sometime in, I don't know, February or something. So I had to do a sort of, 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week education of myself in black drama and black playwriting and black dramaturgy. I mean, I knew some already because I'd been working with black theatre companies in London, but I had to kind of rifle through all sorts of anthologies and start reading up very, very quickly just to put a season together for the following year. So my immediate experience was high stress, total panic, impossible expectations, lots of energy and late nights, and it carried on being like that. My Children, My Africa was incredibly successful in all sorts of ways. We sold it out, it toured all sorts of schools. We sold it out here at the May, and so we put it on again because it was so successful, and in our second run it sold out as well. So that was completely astonishing and very wonderful, that it was such a well-received and satisfying production. And a specific success of it, I suppose, was at the end of the play. It's a very moving play about a friendship between a young white girl and a young black man teenager in South Africa, and the friendship they have that's basically torn apart by the apartheid and by racism there. It was a very moving play, and at the end of all of the performances here at the May, about 85% of the audience would be in tears, and I'd never directed a play that had that intense of an effect on an audience, on an audience of all races coming from all sorts of parts of the world, and that was very, very humbling and moving aspect of the success of that production. And then I'd kind of forgotten about it or moved on from it. And then a few years ago, I was Googling, I think I Googled apartheid for some reason. And one of the first things that came up on my list was a collection of school children's responses to having learnt about the apartheid regime and what it did to people. And it was some commentary by a 14 or 15-year-old at a school in Pierrefonds in Montreal, saying how he had not understood anything at all about the situation there until the Black Theatre Workshop had come and done My Children, My Africa in his school, and then he'd begun to realise how appalling some parts of world history are and how much it affected him. And so I went to the school's website, and there were all these responses and letters and feelings about having learnt about that part of history from all of the kids in the school. And of course, we'd gone in, done the performance and gone away. And just to suddenly realise the impact that one performance that one afternoon had on maybe 200 or 300 young people, and is probably therefore still having, it was a kind of it was a shocker sometimes you don't take stock of the impact that some of your work does, usually because you're so busy and you move on. But just the discovery of that and the impact, the positive educational and kind of compassionate impact that production had, I sat there and had tears in my eyes in front of the computer screen again, all over again, and it was very moving. The company was on a starvation grant from the various arts councils when I was the artistic director, which meant there was just about enough money to pay the office rental, to keep the photocopier and the computers plugged in, to put together a season brochure, but really not really very much more money than that. And I chose as my own mandate during my time to raise the artistic reputation and standards of the company, because they'd taken quite a beating in the previous few years. And I felt that if we could raise the artistic standards, we might attract more funding, and that would kind of generate positive things for the future. But improving artistic standards on a starvation production budget is really, really, really hard. And so the resources you end up using are your own resources of energy. And I was doing that bountifully, but sooner or later you end up feeling kind of empty, however much you're invested in the work. So that was really, really, really a challenge. Another one was being a white woman running a black theatre company. It was a real contradiction. It still is a real contradiction. I was always very careful to explain to people what I thought about it and what was going on, but I experienced a lot of racism. I'd had, some people would go, "How wonderful! That's great! Welcome. We're so glad you're here." And then some people would walk into the office and say, "Where's the artistic director?" And I'd say, "Hello," and they go, and I'd know straight away what was going on. Sometimes I got to the point where I almost felt like apologizing for my race, but that's not an appropriate thing. There's not much I can do about it. So I hoped that I demonstrated by my contribution and my actions during my time that there was no need to apologize, I guess. I restarted what we called the Young Performers Initiative. There had been some stuff like that in the past, but it wasn't happening when I arrived. So we set up a youth program to enable black youth to have to have training or classes or experiences in performance skills and aspects of performance skills. And we had a whole bunch of very, very enthusiastic graduates from the theatre department at Concordia, where I also teach, who would come along and lead workshops with them and train them and just have a great time with them. And we had summer projects, and they put on shows which were amazing and made everybody cry and were very exciting. And sometimes there'd be a sketch where the youth would be reenacting the experience of their ancestors having been slaves, and sometimes they'd do a sketch where the youth would be acting out their aspirations to become astronauts, and I was deeply, deeply delighted that they were doing all of that. The future of Montreal is a completely intercultural city, and so I'm very curious to see where a specifically black theatre workshop situates itself in that cultural ecology, especially given the fact that the current generation of young Afro-Canadian people are majority mixed race, and they don't always define themselves or identify themselves as black. They'll say Afro-Canadian. So I'm very curious to see how that demographic evolution and how the cultural ongoing amazing mix of Quebec and Montreal and Canada, how that plays out in relation to the Black Theatre Workshop. And I wish it all insight and promise and joy with that.